you know, we've all seen the video that it appears he's done it again. I guess you could say maybe not, but I don't think we yet know what it will take to change his behavior.
A day of reckoning is coming. Adam Silver says it himself, and the NBA is about to bring the hammer down on Ja Morant in the worst way possible. We found out that there's additional information following the NBA's investigation into Ja Morant, and we're gonna update you guys on everything. Before we get to the content, this video is very likely to get demonetized. If you want to help us stay in the algorithm, make sure you drop a like, consider subscribing, and turning on our notifications, because whether it's demonetized or not, I'm gonna bring you the content anyway. And now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. So we have a $1,000 giveaway from Prize Picks. They're giving 5 of us a chance to win $1,000. All you have to do is click the link in the description down below to sign up for a chance to be selected to make a 5-pick flex to win $1,000. Use my promo code microphone to get up to a $100 deposit match on Prize Picks. Now let's get to the video. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? At this point, I've read so many comments about you guys not necessarily wanting a gigantic recap of the Ja Morant situation. Yeah, I read my comments. But for those of you guys that are new to one of the biggest stories in the entire NBA, Ja Morant was a model citizen back in December. And I think what really messed him up was this interview that he had where he said he's fine in the West.
Who do you look at around the league as you're studying and say, we're going to have to run through them?
Celtics.
No one in the West.
Nah, I'm fine in the West.
And since then, there was a report about him beating up a 17-year-old kid, allegedly, followed by his friend being accused of pointing a laser or a weapon at a security guard at an Indiana Pacers game. Ja Morant himself approaching a mall security guard to intimidate him. And right when we thought it couldn't get worse, Ja Morant would pull out a gun on Instagram Live and flex it while he was at a strip club. The NBA decided that they were going to suspend Ja Morant following this, and he ended up only being suspended for 8 games. The man went to like 2 weeks of therapy, and the NBA said, you know what? Ja Morant's good.
He hates me, yet he caught me. Man is good.
He only needed 2 weeks of therapy. And to be honest, man, I mean, how much therapy do you need to tell a human being, yo, you see gun? You don't show gun on your videos. I mean, I own a gun in my household. Have you guys ever seen me go on Instagram Live and start dancing around with my gun? Right when Ja Morant got off scot-free, which by the way, he probably got a lot of rope considering how he's one of the young stars in the NBA and a huge part of the NBA's future. Right when he got off scot-free, once again on social media, he was shown dancing with a gun. When we heard of this, Adam Silver's initial reaction at the NBA draft lottery was this.
Talk directly about the consequences first before we got to a subsequent potential to have done something wrong. We were very focused on the misconduct that was in front of us at the time. Most of our conversation was about how incredibly serious the first incident was.
And following an apology that totally wasn't from ChatGPT, where Ja Morant said, I know I've disappointed a lot of people who supported me. This is a journey and I recognize there is much work to do. My words may not mean much right now, but I take full accountability for my actions and I'm committed to continuing to work on myself. Ja Morant then posted a bunch of cryptic pictures onto his Instagram story, where he essentially is saying goodbye to the media in his final picture. It was a scary situation. The cops actually checked in on Ja Morant, and that was what our previous video was on. And this brings us to where we are right now. How do you like that? How long did that recap take? I think that was one of my quickest recaps to date. Now, since then, we were wondering what is going to happen with Ja Morant, because on one hand, you could make the argument that Ja Morant isn't necessarily endangering anyone. It's not like he's taking out the weapon and threatening other human beings. As a matter of fact, what he's doing is even sillier. He's just dancing around with the gun on his social media, probably because he was influenced by YoungBoy's lyrics. I mean, he totally is influenced by this man's lyrics, by the way.
It's a parade inside my city, yeah. It's a parade inside my city, yeah.
Floor.
There's a parade inside my city, yeah.
And I mean, in the past, you've seen Ja Morant celebrating with guns.
It's a contrast with the setup. You know, we got our flyby king. The setup there is Ja Morant looking.
You see Brandon Clark, like he's like the whole.
So I don't think Ja is out there to hurt anyone in particular. I just think he's young and impressionable, and as a result of the content that he decided to consume, obviously his behavior is going to be influenced in a manner, which is ironic because for those of you guys that are wondering what's wrong with what Ja Morant's doing, it's more the fact that the NBA doesn't want to expose a lot of today's youth to dancing on Instagram with guns. I mean, how often do you hear about school shootings, man? I'm not saying dancing on Instagram results in school shootings, but dancing with a gun on social media and making that normal is definitely not something that you want the NBA's image and brand to be associated with, especially a league that went very, very far to try to distance itself with being perceived as a sport that had gang ties in it, which is why they overhauled the dress code in the 2000s, by the way. It's why everyone wears business attire to NBA games now. So I understand the NBA's concern here, but it's been a while now, and we were wondering, what is Ja Morant's punishment going to be?
You know, we've all seen the video that it appears he's done it again. I guess you could say maybe not, but I don't think we yet know what it will take to change his behavior. You know, same thing I said at the time. You know, he seems to be, you know, a fine young man. I mean, I in terms of my dealings with him, I think he's clearly made some mistakes, but he's young, and you know, I'm hoping now, you know, once we conclude at the end of our process what the appropriate discipline is, that it's not just about the discipline. It's about now what we, the Players Association, his team, and he and the people around him are going to do to create better circumstances going forward. I think that's ultimately what's most important here.
Well, Adam Silver answered this in an interview with Sam Amick of The Athletic. In this interview, Silver says this: in assessing what discipline is appropriate, if that's the case, we look at both the history of prior acts, but then we look at the individual player's history as well, and the seriousness, of course, of the conduct. Those are all things that get factored. It's not an exact science. It comes down to judgment at the end of the day on the part of me and my colleagues in the league office. In terms of the timing, we've uncovered a fair amount of additional information. And I think since I was first asked about the situation, I will say we probably could have brought it to a head now, but we made the decision, and I believe the Players Association agrees with us, that it would be unfair to these players and these teams in the middle of the series to announce the results of that investigation. It's really funny because Adam Silver has been doing this a lot throughout the Ja Morant situation. He first gave us an update during the NBA draft lottery, during one of the most hyped up NBA draft lotteries that I think we've ever seen in NBA history. I mean, you had Adrian Wojnarowski saying this.
This is the most highly anticipated player to ever enter the NBA, and this is maybe not only the greatest prospect in the NBA's history, maybe the greatest prospect in the history of team sports.
Wow.
So when you had all of those eyeballs watching the NBA draft lottery, and to give the update that you did, clearly this is significant, but obviously it is a scenario that has national spotlight, and Adam Silver clearly acknowledges that. I mean, you had Shams Charania going on both the Pat McAfee show and on CNN to discuss the situation. Something else that's very significant about this is the fact that Adam Silver said that they uncovered a fair amount of additional information. And the crappy part about this is you don't necessarily know if what he's saying by this means, hey, we found out a bunch of other stuff that Ja Morant has been doing and it's really bad, so we have to suspend him very hard and bring the hammer down on him, or we found out a bunch of additional information that gives us context into the situation, so we're going to be a little bit more lenient once again. Adam Silver does seem to be backpedaling here a a little bit too by saying, hey, by the way, it's not an exact science. It comes down to judgment at the end of the day on the part of me and my colleagues in the league office, which I'll give him props because at least they're acknowledging that. We've covered the NFL a lot on my microphone channel. I guess the best example I could give you is the Deshaun Watson case. The Deshaun Watson case was an absolute shit show. Not in the case that Deshaun Watson should have been punished more or punished less, but in the case that they hired somebody to initially give Deshaun Watson a punishment. The punishment was 4 games, and then the NFL decided to appeal that punishment, drawing even more attention to it. I just thought that was ridiculous. Eventually, they kind of had to negotiate what was a fair punishment between Deshaun Watson's camp and the NFL's camp. I mean, I felt like this was the most inefficient way to do anything ever. So in this particular instance, it seems like Adam Silver is pulling up and saying, hey, I want you to know that it's just me and a bunch of my colleagues just trying to figure out what's the fair and just punishment in this particular scenario. And it's not an exact science. And to be fair, it isn't. But Amit continues to say it sure sounded as if a conclusion has already been reached, or at least something close to it. But if the choice was made, as Silver intimated, to delay all those unflattering headlines while hoping against hope that the general public finds these NBA finals compelling in the meantime. Wow, that was kind of like a little bit of a jab at the NBA finals, which I don't blame people for throwing shade at this year's NBA finals. Not that I don't like the NBA finals or anything, but if I could imagine casual basketball fans just looking at it and saying, hey, it's just the first round series between a 1 and an 8 seed. Unless if the Miami Heat do something insane, then that's a different story. But I can understand why the NBA wouldn't want to take any attention away from the NBA finals, even though it doesn't have as much narrative juice this year in comparison to other years. There is more information about it. Check this out. The article continues to say, to Silver's credit, he offered a genuine answer when faced with the question about whether he had any regret with his first ruling. He has always been a better Angels kind of commissioner, very different from his longtime mentor, the late great David Stern, and his authoritarian ways. But when asked by Yahoo Sports' Vincent Goodwill if a harsher ruling the first time around may have served as a deterrent to this recurrence, Silver reflected in the kind of way that may not bode well for what's to come. I've thought about that, Silver began. Joe Dumars, who is here, was in the room with me when we met with Jaw, and he's known Jaw longer than I have. For me, at the time, an 8-game suspension seemed very serious. And the conversation we had with Tamika Tremaglio, the executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, was there as well. Felt heartfelt and serious, but I think he understood that it wasn't about his words, it was going to be about his future conduct. Now, Amit gives us a warning. This next part is crazy. I guess in hindsight, I don't know. If it had been a 12-game suspension instead of an 8-game suspension, would that have mattered? It seemed appropriate at the time. That's all I can say. Maybe by definition, to the extent we've all seen the video, that it appears he's done it again. I guess you could say maybe not, but I don't think we yet know what it will take to change his behavior. It's the same thing I said at the time. He seems to be a fine young man. In terms of my dealings with him, I think he's clearly made some mistakes, but he's young, and I'm hoping now, once we conclude at the end of our process what the appropriate discipline is, that it's not just about the discipline, it's about now what we, the Players Association, his team, and he, the people around him, are going to do to create better circumstances going forward. I kind of see where Adam Silver's coming from, because you also have to take context into account at the time. The NBA is a business. Ja Morant isn't some sort of end-of-the-bench basketball player for the Memphis Grizzlies. Yes, I know historically the Memphis Grizzlies performed well without him on the floor, but at the same time, this was a team that could have potentially been the next up-and-coming team for the Western Conference. I mean, they were second in the West at the time. They were one of the top offensive and defensive teams at the time. They were a very young team as well that was built with homegrown talent that they drafted themselves. Players like Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks. Okay, maybe not Dylan Brooks anymore, but I could understand why Adam Silver would say, hey, look, you made a mistake here. We're going to give you an 8-game suspension. Don't do this again. And feeling confident that Ja Morant wouldn't do something like this again, given the blowback that he had faced. I mean, think about it this way. 2 months ago, Ja Morant had an 8-game suspension, had to go through a brief therapy period, was consistently trending in social media, was the topic of daily sports talk shows. I think I've made like 8 videos on him at this point, and it seemed like, at least this is my theory. I mean, this is 100% a theory, actually trending towards conspiracy at this point. In my head, I think the NBA definitely did cover it up at the time, because what they would end up saying is that the gun was fake. And what I'm thinking is, who the hell is traveling around with a fake gun and bringing it into clubs and dancing around with it in clubs, let alone the fact that the club claimed that Ja Morant was sober while he was doing all this, which, by the way, is an even worse look. If he was at least drunk, I'd forgive him. I mean, I'm not saying poor decisions are excused by being drunk, but the fact that you're sober and doing this type of crap is insane to me. And then to get out of jail for free, essentially, and then come back and make your same mistake again, Adam Silver's in a tough situation because, to be honest, I'm sure he didn't think he was gonna be in this situation to begin with. So when the official decision comes, I know Adam Silver has made his decision, but he's keeping his cards close to his chest. But when the official decision comes, we will be here to talk about it. So make sure you're subscribed and have our notifications on. Let me know in the comment section how long you think the suspension should be. Do you think it should be a full year? Do you think it should be 40 games? Do you think Ja Morant needs to leave Memphis? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.